Please welcome Suzanne Ciani.
So lovely to be here and to share this absolutely special time with such a special group, a small group of people. So I'm very excited to be here. I was supposed to come to Red Bull last year. Maybe some of you were supposed to come last year, I don't know. And as you know, the terrorist attack happened in Paris. So this is actually my first time at Red Bull. Nice to be here. Thanks.
You've done way too many things to frame them in a brief intro. So I was actually going to start with the story of someone else, and that is the nice gentleman that we see, who we see in the pictures here. Who is that?
That's my dear friend. Oh, I'm going to cry.
I'm going to take over from here. If you need a minute, don't worry. A few weeks ago, on September 17th of this year, Don Buchla, who's in the picture here, left this earth. He was a very dear friend of Suzanne, and he was also maybe the most important encounter that you had in your life.
I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry.
It's so new for me.
Let's
not
give it a
to have
minute.
him. Okay, but no, yeah, we go way back. Really, for me, my beginnings of my career were with this person. I had just finished graduate school, a very traditional training. So I got a master's degree in composition. And I wasn't that happy in traditional music. And it wasn't a particularly good place for a woman. Every composer has had difficulty getting their music heard, traditional composers. Even Mahler, if he hadn't been the conductor of the symphony, he wouldn't have had the opportunities that he had. So combined with being female, I looked at the possibilities of a future in traditional music, and it didn't look good. So I was open to something new. And as luck would have it, my boyfriend at the time was teaching in the art department, and his professor had a studio right next door to Don Buchla. So these were big warehouses on the Oakland shorelines. It was an unusual area. And one night, he took me over to meet Don Buchla. And my life just changed completely because I knew about music technology a little bit. This was 1969, so there wasn't that much. But when I saw Don, I just knew, when I saw his studio with all the modules, just mountains of modules there, I decided I would work for him. And so when I finished graduate school, I got a job soldering circuit boards and was fired after the first day.
Why?
Yeah. I was fired because, Don was a taskmaster. He was a very serious person. When we worked at the table soldering, we weren't allowed to talk. The public radio station was on in the background. We could listen to that. We had very strict rules about when we could stop to eat. And at the end of the day, they found a cold soldering joint. And they said, oh, it must be the new girl. So she's out.
What did you do?
I said, you can't fire me. And I showed up the next day. I just came back. And it was quite a struggle. My experience with Don is so real. It's not some airy-fairy, mystical thing. It was rough. I I think our relationship over the almost 50 years that I knew him had two distinct episodes. One was in the beginning from 1969 to, after I moved to New York, maybe the first 10, 15 years. And then we had a break. Then I moved back to California in 92, and we became friends. I had already given up playing the Buchla by that time. And we became tennis partners. He loved tennis, I loved tennis. And we would get together and play, once a week. And I had no intention of ever playing the Buchla again.
Before we go to how you got back to playing the Buchla, what was the very first model that you yourself laid your hands on, and where was that?
Well, the one that Buchla had at his studio was a 200. There was also a facility it was the new housing for the San Francisco Tape Music Center. And that was now housed in Mills College. It had no visual connection with the college, other than that it was, had a place there. And I could go there for $5 an hour, but they never, ever collected the money. And for $5 an hour, you could play a Buchla 100, a Moog, early Moog, 15, I guess, and surplus electronics, surplus parts.
What kind of institution is that, or has that been, the San Francisco Tape Music Center? Because not everyone might know.
Well, it was really started, the impetus for Don Buchla was Mort Subotnick. So Mort had this idea that he wanted an electronic machine. He found Don Buchla, and thus was born this early voltage-controlled electronic music concept. By the time I met Don, which was a few years later, he had already progressed enormously in his vision of what this machine would be. I talked to Mort, actually, at a Red Bull interview a year ago, and I was surprised to find that he never thought of the Buchla as a performance instrument. He thought of it as something you recorded. You made a nice sound, you put it on tape, you made another sound, you overdubbed, and that's how Silver Apples was made. It was really a tape project. By the time I met Don, I was proselytized with his new vision, which is that he was making a performance instrument in the tradition of musical instruments that you played live. And is that the question you asked me? Where are we? I could go on and on, but I want to stay on track here.
Can we see the second picture, please? I love this picture because you're actually using, I think, a tiny telephone patch cable as your hairband. And
all right. That was the year I went to New York City, 1974. And in keeping with the concept of a performance instrument, you can see that, Don did everything. He designed those cases. It came in portable cases. And he designs everything, how it was padded, how it fit in, and so it could travel. Of course, it didn't travel well. I hate to say that, but that was the beginning of the problems that I had was when I moved to New York. So this was 1974, and this was a picture taken for the New York Times.
How long had you played the Buchla when you went to New York? How many years?
About, by that time, I started in 1969, so about 5 years. But, I went to New York with just the Buchla. That's all I had. I went to do a live concert. So a friend of mine was a sculptor, and he had an opening in an art gallery. And he asked me to perform. So I went a month ahead of time to New York, and I, rehearsed for a month. I did the concert, but I never left New York. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Please go on.
No, I mean, I'm telling the story backwards, actually, because, from the second I got to New York, I never wanted to leave it. It just electrified me. And so I stayed. I never went back. I had all my things put in storage, and I had just the Buchla, and I lived with that.
Is this the recording that we have on vinyl here? The concert?
This is pretty close to that time. This recording is from 1975. The first recording, which was done in the art gallery, there was no recording made. My dad made a cassette recording, and I lost it. And the next two concerts in 1975, I mean, there were other ones, but these were, the one at WBAI was recorded rather professionally, but in stereo, of course, because all of my performances were quadraphonic. And the other one at Phil Niblock's was recorded just with a mic. In the room you can hear the trucks. But it's also interesting that you can hear all the switches being moved, because the process of performing the Buchla, you have to do a lot of real-time switching.
So,
I
should
would
we
do
play?
the BAI first, because that was the first one. Sorry, but...
Yeah, here it
Okay.
is. Got re-released this year by Finders Keepers.
Thank you.
I'm wondering at that time, how long did it take you from an idea to hear a sound? How long did it take you to get to a point where you had patched the synthesizer in a way that you could play it like that?
The approach, in this release, especially in the archival release, there is a booklet that goes with it, because I got a grant right after I did this, and the National Endowment, and they asked me to write a paper. And I would never have done this had I not been given this grant. And basically, this paper outlines how to play the Buchla. And it has the diagrams for the spatial control, and it has the patch set up, and all the techniques. I mean, there are many techniques that I distilled from my years of performing on that instrument. And I still use them today, but it's a slightly different approach because the instrument is different today. This instrument had no memory, but you could store the sequencer pitches. So, there were 4 rows of 16 pitches. And I had something called a multiple arbitrary function generator, which they didn't really make an update of that one. They have something that was called a MARF, and now they have the DARF, which is the dual arbitrary function generator, and it's not as good as the MARF. But I'm getting sidetracked. What was the question?
So basically, there are 2 versions of the instrument that Suzanne played over the years. There's a 200, and now she's playing a 200E. But we're talking about the times of the 200, and you couldn't really save things. And also, before you went to New York, you did a summer course in computer music, right, with John Charning.
Yes.
And during that time, I think it's difficult for people to imagine nowadays that there was actually a time where you had to compute music. You had to put in numbers, then let it process for a few hours.
No, overnight.
Overnight. So how did that work?
You kids, you just don't know what that was like. I mean, you used punched cards, and get the card. You've heard of that, right? Okay. Punch cards. And then, so one time you would design these pieces, you'd draw out all the oscillators and all the routing and all that and put the numbers in. And one time I did this whole composition. I was so excited. I went in the next day to pick up the tape, which was like gargantuan. And I had forgotten to specify a volume. So the whole thing computed, but it had no volume. So the piece was in there. It was just, you couldn't hear it. And I was like, but I learned a lot doing the computer music, and it was such a privilege to work with Max Matthews. I mean, he's just a saint. You know, we're at a time right now where we're really seeing the passing of some of the great, you know, cornerstones of this music technology. You know, it's in my lifetime, you know, I'm much older than you are, but I have seen, you know, the beginnings, and now we're starting to lose those people that started it.
Max Matthews and John Chowning were both teaching at Stanford at that time, and I think John Chowning is most known for the development of FDP synthesis,
Right.
etc. Just that you have some
Frequency modulation. He licensed it to like Yamaha and made a lot of money for the University of Stanford.
At this time when many of these inventions first sort of appeared in your life, how did you imagine the future?
I thought everybody would have one of these in like minutes. You know, I really did. And so I was very patient because nobody knew what was going on. If I played the Buchla, nobody even knew that the sound was coming from the machine. It was so heartbreaking in a way, the communication gap. And I always took the time to explain because I felt responsible, you know, for that I was going to, you know, help all this to happen. And it was just never going to happen then. It wasn't time to happen. But now it's happening.
I was going to say, in this room, sort of everyone has something, one machine that has something to do with the Buchla 200. I think there's a pretty big chance we're on 100% here.
Yeah.
But many years passed between that, and as you said, you moved to New York, and the first few years were quite a struggle to survive there because all you had was a Buchla.
Right.
And all you did was music.
Right. You know, it became clear to me because I was living in Soho at the time before it was Soho. And at one point I was sleeping on the floor of, you know, Philip Glass's studio. And there were a lot of artists there. And actually a lot of them would go to Berlin. Berlin was very hot even back then. But the artists had something to sell. They had drawings, they had paintings, they had things. We didn't have anything to sell because you couldn't. There were no CDs then. A normal person couldn't make an LP. You had to have a record deal to get an LP. So there was nothing that we could monetize except maybe performing. That was the only option. I tried to get a record deal. I went every place with my Buchla. And they said, you know, why don't you sing? Why don't you play the guitar? Like, what's wrong with you? And even the concerts were hard. You know, I had a date booked at Lincoln Center, and I said, well, I need 4 speakers. I said, I can only play in quadraphonic. And they said, well, we can't do that. And I said, well, then I can't play. And that was the end of that. And so I then, you know, I don't know if you want to hear all this story, but I decided to change the theater. So I started a corporation called the Electronic Center for New Music. They were about to rebuild Avery Fisher Hall. And I thought if I could get all these, you know, audio engineering people on my board, which I did, you know, we would design a new theater that could accommodate electronic music. And I went to Lincoln Center, and I had my board, and I had all my people, and I said, this is what we need to do. And they said, who are you? You're not rich. You're not famous. You know, you're not Leonard Bernstein. I mean, I said, oh, you need rich and famous? Okay. I'll be back, you know.
Can we watch the first video, please? And that's how you got rich and famous.
Yeah. Yeah. And let me just tell you, because you'll never understand. I mean, there was no synchronization of picture and tape machine in those days. There was no SMPTE time code. There was no lock. There was no way you could get, and we were working with a 2-inch machine. I'm going to tell you about the old days, you know. And the video recorders were these some 3/4-inch U-matic cassette machines. And you had to train yourself to start them manually, precisely, so much ahead of time so that they would actually start at the same time. And every single one of those beeps was timed to picture. You know, they gave me a picture. I had to make the beeps go with it. It was a huge Herculean job because every time we had to check a beep, we had to go through this, you know, primitive manual starting of these machines.
Was it easier for you to get your more experimental ideas through in the ad world than in the music world at that time?
The music world, especially the recording world, was definitely closed. They look backwards. They say, this is the hit we have. Can we get another one like that? They want what they already have. They're not looking to break through, really. Not those big record companies. And advertising is like, oh my God, let's be different. Let's be on the edge. Let's do something. We don't care if we understand it. We want something new. We want to be, you know, the first. So it was perfect for me to break through in advertising.
You did get ignored, though, a few times, for example, by a gentleman called Billy Davis.
Right. This is another one of my, you know, stubborn stories. But yeah, I was knocking on the doors. I was hungry. This was a great motivation. So I had my Buchla. I had a list of the top 20 advertising agencies. And I had a calendar. And I would, you know, write down on the calendar when I called. And they would always say, call back in 2 weeks. And so I would call back in 2 weeks, and they would say, call back in 2 weeks. And I had this long list, and every once in a while they'd say, okay, come on in. So I had an appointment with Billy Davis, the head of music at the largest advertising agency in the world.
And a veteran of Motown.
Yes, a veteran of Motown. Amazing guy. He brought Motown to Madison Avenue. He did all the Coca-Cola music and more. He was amazing. Anyway, he stood me up once, he stood me up twice, and he stood me up the third time, and I said, wait a minute. I said, I was in his office, and they said he wasn't there, and I said, well, where is he? And they told me where he was, and I went over to the studio, and I said, you know, you had an appointment with me. And he said, oh, you know, who are you? And this is the story, though. At that very moment, they were playing a Coca-Cola commercial. And they had a hole in it. It was a radio spot. And he said, well, you know, what do you do? And I said, I play the Buchla. And what's that? Well, I make sounds. Oh, okay. And then he shows me this opening. He said, can you do something in there? And I said, yes, of course. And he said, what do you need? I said, I need my Buchla. He said, go get it. So I went and got the Buchla. And what happened? So I made this little sound called the pop and pour. And they used it in every commercial all over the world. So I hit the... yeah. And all of this meant, that I could launch my recording career, because I, by that time, figured out that the record companies weren't going to be financing my records.
There was one sort of other milestone of those years, one other sound design milestone, at least in my taste. Can we please watch the next video? Not surprisingly, Bally Entertainment advertised this as sexy new pinball game.
I had no idea how many young boys were getting excited by that game.
Those machines are still around. There's actually one in Montreal in a pinball parlor.
Yes, so I've heard. We have to go see it.
Did you ever get one?
I did. I got one, but I never had room for it, so yeah, I don't have one, no.
At that time, you were doing ads and sound design for machines, such as this one, but were you also involved in playing on other people's music?
Other people's music?
Did people call you up and ask you to do
I did a lot of sessions. Yeah, I did a lot of, but when I first got to New York, I did session work, so I was a gun for hire, and I did a lot of CTI jazz records. I did Miko's Star Wars disco version. I did things for the movies, Fame, The Stepford Wives. But then, I saw that people didn't really know how to use electronics effectively, because I was always being called in after tracks had been laid down, and they wanted me to, add something to it. Well, you could add a certain thing, but you couldn't be rhythmically, the core. And I knew we had to start with the electronics. And so I started my own company, basically, so that I could do it all, do the whole production, because I knew how to integrate it better. You'd be hired to add something and there would be no space, or there wouldn't be the right opportunity.
I'm just looking up, you had this amazing sort of quote, trademark quote saying, Suzanne Ciani supplying synthesized seasoning. I love that.
Okay. Right. It was seasoning at first, and then it became from the ground up, the structure. Mm-hmm.
You were talking about the Star Wars disco theme, so I'd like to play a few seconds of that.
Okay. The recording sounds very bassy. Yeah, okay.
The recording sounds very bassy, and Suzanne just told me it's the wrong speed. It is a WAV file, so I don't know how it could possibly...
I know.
My computer is older,
it's sped
so maybe
up.
it started to...
Okay, maybe I was taking a nap. Well, anyway, that was a fun project, yeah.
What was your experience when it comes to how people were trying to incorporate the synthesizer in their composings? What were they expecting, knowing electronics so little, the composers that you worked with?
Well, the whole thing went through, the technology kind of took a left turn. So when I came to New York and I had the Buchla and I didn't use a keyboard, it opened up things in a new way of sound design. Then all these instruments started to come out that had keyboards. And it changed the perception of electronic music to something that was just a timbre that you played on a keyboard, and that you might replace or augment a traditional instrument. Maybe you'd be part of the string section, or you'd be a flute, or maybe even an odd sounding flute. But it was upsetting to me because it really narrowed the purview of what was possible with electronics. And it just kept going in that direction. It became more and more keyboard oriented. And for me, electronics is, because I'm a Buchla, I started with the Buchla. It was never about the timbre or the sound, really. It was about the way the sound could move, how you could control it. It wasn't like, oh, what a great sound. It was, no, what a great arc of motion. What, a sound that starts here and then it ends up here and it spins around the room and it's in motion. It was a different approach to the possibilities. And, it got complicated because the unions thought that electronic music was replacing musicians. And that was a dead end. That was a dangerous thing because actually it worked for me. I don't know if any of you care about this, but in order to punish people for using the synthesizer, we didn't call it a synthesizer, but electronic music, the union said, well, you have to pay double scale. They didn't want you to hire a synthesist. And every time they overdub, you have to pay them again. So by the rules of the union, if I went in to do a session and somebody asked me to play 3 lines, I made what 6 people would make. So it worked for me.
Well, you just said that you didn't call it the synthesizer. Was that because you rejected the idea of the machine synthesizing what an instrument would do?
Yes.
What did Don Buchla think about that?
Well, that was his concept. I was born of Don Buchla's ideas. And he thought the keyboard was an inappropriate interface. And even though I grew up as a pianist, when I started to play the Buchla, I didn't touch a keyboard for 10 years. I didn't want anything to do with it. And the other thing, he never wanted to use the word synthesizer. He called it, he didn't know what to call it. He called it the electric music box. Otherwise, you say an electronic music instrument.
But at the same time, there were other instrument developers who did use keyboards, for example, Moog. Mm-hmm. And you worked with Moog synthesizers or instruments as well, didn't you?
Actually, no. I didn't. The Mini Moog was a huge hit at that time in New York. And it was basically, that bass sound that you heard on everything. And the filter was wonderful. I didn't start working with Moog until a few years ago. And, they invited me to the first Moog Fest. And I said I would go because I wanted to represent Don Buchla. So I played this thing called a piano bar, which is something that Don invented. It was a MIDI interface. So you put this thing on top of a piano, a traditional piano, and it senses the pitch and the volume and translates it into MIDI. And Moog manufactured that. So I played that at first Moog Fest. And then the last Moog Fest, they invited me to do something special for Don. Anyway, they've become friends. The old days, there was this polarization. Moog was in the East and Buchla was in the West. And, there was this warfare going on. And as far as I can tell, over the years, all of that is dissolved. There aren't any, adamant parties anymore. But in the beginning, there were. And so now everybody's friends. That's great.
I would like to show another clip that shows you using a third synthesizer, actually one that Dave Smith developed.
Oh, yeah.
The Prophet 5. Can we please watch the next video? You've been a guest at the David Letterman morning show at NBC in, I think, 1980. And when I watched the recording, the video of that, I realized 2 things. A, how new this was for him. And B, him being almost insecure, surprised, or, just not used to standing next to a woman who was doing technology and who knew technology a lot better than him. So one thing we haven't talked about so far today is how was that for you, being the only woman in the room with the machines?
Well, you know, I was lucky that I was doing something that nobody understood. You know, so that definitely gave me the edge. Nobody could argue with it, and nobody could interfere. So in that way, you know, I was lucky, because I think if you are a woman and if you want to move forward, it's harder to be noticed if you're in a pool of men doing the same thing. You know, I think it worked for me as a woman because I didn't have any competition. I mean, there weren't even any guys doing this, really. So, you know, finding something unique.
Did that change in the sort of 20 years before that, or 10 years before that, from the 60s when you were at Berkeley, the late 60s, to the David Letterman show? Did it change? Was it always the same for you to be the woman with the machines, or did it get easier over time?
Certain things I've noticed vis-a-vis that topic of women, and that is that, you know, one area, I got a feature film in 1980, and I was considered the first woman to be hired to score a major Hollywood feature. Another woman was not hired to do a major Hollywood feature until 1994. So, you know, the opportunities, the fact that I had this little edge by being unusual, I mean, gave me visibility. But even that wasn't enough to change the gears of the music business in any way. And we're still in the process of changing those gears a little bit. You know, I had wanted to be an engineer. Nobody would hire, you know, when I started out, I always had female engineers. I loved women engineers. I mean, it's hard to say you like one gender over another, but honestly, in electronic music, which was different then, the men were coming from an already entrenched approach to sound. They were working in pop music or standard music. They could tweak a bass, they could EQ a drum set. They had all those go-to solutions. But what I was doing had no go-to solution. It was like, okay, what are we hearing right now? How does this sit in the track? What do we need to do right now with this sound that has no precedent? And the women that I worked with were not already stuck in something. And they just, you know, I have to say that I always got a great result from the female engineers.
One of your female engineers was, you have to help me with her last name, Leslie.
Leslie Mona Mathis, yeah.
I want to say one last tiny bit of an interview, of a video. It's Fifth Wave recording session part 3, please. Leslie was one of the engineers working in your studio for the recording of your very first actual solo record in 1982 called 7 Waves.
Yes, yes.
That you self-financed. How come?
Well, it took 2 years to do that album. And I, you know, as I said, I looked for a record deal and I couldn't get one. It was very expensive then to record. We didn't have computers. We didn't have home studios. That was a home studio. That home studio I got because I did the film score. And I used the money from the film score to build, you know, my home studio. But most of 7 Waves was done in outside studios. So I would block out a studio for a weekend. And it would cost thousands of dollars. I mean, we're in a different time now. The instruments were hugely expensive. I had one instrument, the synclavier, that was over $200,000. 10 megabytes of memory for the synclavier cost $50,000. So you guys are in another, and I'm in that world with you now. So I'm very, very happy to be here. But the studios were really expensive, and the project, you'd spend $100,000 recording an album. Technology, also because, I wanted it to be the top. So when NECAM memory came in, we had to go to the studio with NECAM. And, they had EMT plates, that sounded the best. And, there were things that cost money. And I didn't want that to be a deciding factor. So yeah.
And working in the ad world helped you to do that, basically.
Yeah, and not only did the ad world give me money, it gave me a lot of experience, because in those days, it was like a renaissance, and we worked in the top studios with the top talent. You could get Steve Gadd on drums, or Michael Brecker, or the Brecker brothers, on your Judson 28800. You called one number and you could book any musician, any singer. A lot of the singers became pop singers. So you had an amazing talent pool. You had the best recording facilities, and you got a lot of great experience in the studio. The weird thing was that even though I worked with all these great musicians in advertising or jingles, whatever, I didn't use them on my personal albums. I just very select few, like Elliot, the guitar player. Oh gosh, Elliot.
The guitar player Elliot.
He lives in
I don't know
England
his
now.
last name either.
Oh God, you probably don't know either. But anyway, every once in a while, I would put one of them on the album. Yeah.
But why was that? Why didn't you use them?
Because it was art in a way. Even though I felt that I worked as an artist in my commercial work, because I had a lot of independence, freedom. And I did go into a bubble, and I did what I wanted to do. But I made this distinction about, I didn't want my music to be coming through the machinery of pop music.
And the machinery that it kind of got released in was actually not really pop music, but a very new genre. You became famous in, I guess, New Age.
Right? Somebody told me New Age is making a comeback now. Could that be? Is it really? Oh my God. Do you do? That's, yeah, don't drive with it. Yeah, that's like.
It's maybe thanks to you that it's making a comeback.
Oh my.
But did you like it at that time? Did you like to be under this umbrella, New Age?
Well, the term New Age didn't come, in my experience, until my third album. So the first two, Seven Waves and The Velocity of Love, had no category. Then Neverland, the third album, this category appeared, New Age, and they put me in it. And it was good news and bad news. It was good news because now there was a place to find it. But it was bad news because, I don't want to poison your mind at all, but it was very controversial the first time around, New Age, because it became a catch-all. Nobody really knew what it was at first. It became a catch-all for all instrumental music. And some of it, it just went the gamut of spa music to sophisticated instrumental music. And nobody under this enormous umbrella could agree as to what really it was. So to me, I just divorced myself from the controversy. I said, I was making this music before New Age, I'm making it after New Age, and I don't care what you call it.
Like a lot of people around me, musicians, listen to New Age, but I think maybe like we're mixing New Age and ambient as like a whole, like, this healing music thing?
Well, the odd thing was that 7 Ways for me was a healing music record. Okay, so I noticed in electronics that you had this perfect rhythm that I thought gave one comfort and predictability. And not only could you have a nice regular rhythm, but it could be very, very slow. Humans couldn't play, slow perfectly. So the whole beauty of the machine, to me, was that it would give you this safe place to be. As created a world of sensuality, also, something physical, something that felt good.
So maybe ambient was just under the New Age umbrella for a certain kind of time. There was just everything was, as you said, everything was New Age. But I think we should listen to one track so everyone gets an idea.
Thank you.
You got nominated for 5 Grammys for this kind of music.
Yeah. That was, by the way, the first time that I added an acoustic instrument to the electronics. That one song. So that was the last song I did for the second album, and I added piano.
Because at this time you stopped playing the Buchla 200. Why was that?
Oh, I had an intervention. I had a nervous breakdown basically because I had moved to New York, and the Buchla is fragile. It would break, and absolutely nobody could fix it. Don even came to New York once, and we had the head of the Audio Engineering Society, and we had Don's versions of his schematics, which nobody could understand. And it was just beyond, I'm a little helpless as an electronic musician because I'm not an engineer. I didn't design the inside. I'm responsible for the outside. And I think in this field that there is it is a collaborative process. I think if you have to focus on the side that you want to put all your energy into. So I do see this work as involving a partnership. And Don, as I said, was somewhat difficult with me in those early days. And I would send the machine back to be fixed, and then he would ship it to New York, and it would come back even more broken than when it went because of the shipping. And there was no solution. A friend said, "You've got to start playing other instruments." I said, no, I won't. And so people started giving me instruments and buying me instruments and saying, do that. And so I did, make a transition. And then I started working with Roland and Yamaha. And Yamaha sponsored me for many years with, tons of equipment for live performance. And so I did move to other instruments, but of course it was it's always different, right? Because the machine is going to dictate what it is that the parameters of how you work. Playing a Yamaha, they had some nice designs, but it wasn't a Buchla. It wasn't an integrated performance system.
I can't possibly imagine how that must have felt. You spent how many years? 10 years with this one instrument, and then it's gone, and there's no way to get another one. It's just like...
Yeah, it was traumatic.
Suddenly you're a painter and someone takes
your violin away or your paint or whatever, right? Yeah, it was very traumatic, and that's why I wasn't anxious to get back into it. And, Don, as I said, we played tennis for years. And then he called one day and he said, "Look, if you're ever thinking of going back..." Oh, I tried to get the 200 fixed. It had broken down, and it couldn't be fixed. Okay.
I think it's even in a museum in Canada, right?
It is. It's in a museum in Canada. And anyway, Don said, look, if you ever are thinking of getting a Buchla again, he said, now is the time to do it because I'm about to sell the company. And I said, well, maybe we can make a deal, you know. And we did. We made a deal. I won't tell you what it was because it's really very funny. Oh, now I have to tell you. So, am I really going to tell you?
I think so.
Oh, my God. Okay, well, Don's car broke down, and he had a real trash heap of a car. And I had a beautiful Audi A6. And I decided that I didn't want that car. I wanted a more environmentally, you know, conscious car. So I wanted to buy a diesel, which I thought was a smart car. That was before the scandal. Okay. So I said, Don, I have an A6 and maybe we can do a trade. And so we did. He he got the beautiful Audi, and I got the Buchla, plus, you know, some other things. The 200E I still have, and it looks great. My car I took care of like perfectly, right? I love those machines. I took such good care of it. The last time I saw my Audi A6 at Don's, it was covered in mold. The mirrors were broken off. Forget it. But anyway, but don't tell anybody else that's how I got it. So.
But basically, there were, 15 years where you did not play a Buchla between the 200...
Right, exactly.
Well, yeah,
yes.
Deteriorating.
Yes.
And then getting the 200E. And that was after you moved back from New York to the West Coast.
Right.
And I would like to watch a bit of video number 2, please. You moved back from New York to the West Coast, and you moved to a place called Bolinas. Mm-hmm. I think one of the most known stories about Bolinas is that there are no street signs leading to it. Is that true?
It's famous for wanting to be unknown, is what I say. There's no sign. They don't want people to find it. So they take down the street signs, and they took it down for so many years that they just stopped putting it up. But now people have GPSs, so they can get there.
So it is a village or a small town?
It's a small town, an hour outside of San Francisco, right on the coast.
And in this video, you have collaborated with a woman called Kaitlyn Aurelia Smith.
Yes.
And how did you two meet?
She lived in the same small town. So it was really kind of amazing. We have these community dinners where once a month, somebody volunteers to cook, and everybody comes to somebody's home. You bring your own plate and your fork and your glass and your drink, and you have a community dinner. And after dinner, I'm sitting on the floor, and Kaitlyn came up. I didn't know who she was, and she didn't know who I was. And we started talking, and I said, well, what do you do? And she said, well, I play the Buchla. And I said, really? Oh. But, I live in this room. It's very remote, and I'm always looking for an assistant, but it's hard to find anybody there. So I was so excited and said, maybe we could work together. And I was getting ready for a tour with the guys from Finders Keepers. So she came over, and she was my assistant for a while. And then she came up with a project. She said, there's a special thing called Freakways, and they do younger artist, older artist collaborations. And so we did that together in my studio, and that's where we were. Mm-hmm.
You just mentioned the guys from Finders Keepers, which is a UK-based label with a lot of reissues. And they contacted you one day, right? Where did they find you? How did that call happen, or that email?
Okay, I credit, or I don't know, blame maybe finders keepers for bringing me back into this current world of electronic music that I didn't know was going on. And what they did, Andy Votel contacted me, and I didn't know who he was, and I didn't pay any attention. And this went on for a year, 2 years. And finally, he sent me a bunch of records, and I thought they were the weirdest things I'd ever heard. And I didn't get it. And then he said, look, just go into your archives, get some old tapes. And I thought, well, I really should. They always say that 30 years, 35 years is like the maximum for a recorded analog tape because it deteriorates. So I thought, this is the time to really, if I want to preserve these tapes, I should. So I started transferring tapes. They had to be baked and so forth. And I sent a few things to Andy, and I said, I don't know why anybody would want to hear this stuff. So if you want to put it out, fine. I didn't know who he was. He was in Manchester, and I thought it was obscure. And then all of a sudden, I'm on national radio, and all this stuff is happening, and I find out that there's a revolution going on in electronic music that I didn't know about. And so, as I say, I was under a rock. And Andy released all these things like, this was a compilation of like commercial things and early electronic stuff. And then he did the Buchla concerts. And so it's all his fault.
I think we should, at this point, open up to questions. I'm just going to play a bit of a 7-inch that I think you also released.
I never heard that version, actually. That was originally commercial, and I guess they edited it to make it into a...
For Atari.
Yeah, it was a commercial for Atari, yeah.
New Age fans and Atari fans out here.
Right.
The microphone.
Hi.
Hi.
I read an interview. You gave Philip Glass synth lessons.
Yes, I did.
I would.
And
like
he was hopeless. Absolutely hopeless. I mean, I said, Philip, your music is made for sequencers. And his friends, his musicians were always going crazy counting, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, and trying to play those patterns. And I thought, this is a no-brainer. I have my synth in your studio. Let's just do it. And he was very studious, and we had regular times, and he would show up, and it just couldn't work. He just wasn't going to get it.
Thank you.
So it was a loss in a way.
First, I'd like to say that I'm so happy to be with you in the same space right now.
Thank you.
Yeah. I guess when the sound from the machine, when you play the first time, it would be really, really innovative, and people called it, maybe it was the sound from the future. Maybe people called it could be the sound from the future, right?
The picture?
From the future.
Oh, from the future.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I guess so. And then now, recently, some people tried to make some sound, like wearable sound, like sub-pop, or like, for example, like Bjork trying to move to the space, to the virtual reality now. Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, like, one day maybe it's too rational. Maybe one day human musician will not be needed anymore. Just AI or just computer will gonna make music instead of human or whatever. Yeah. Anyway, I'm curious about how you think about how you predict the future sound from now.
I think, a lot of my ideas come from a long time ago. And, you know, we had a way of thinking back then that was really futuristic, and some of those things happened and some didn't. And I think it's fine if machines make music all by themselves, and that's okay. We're going to design the machines. I mean, you know, we have input. But I think, you know, what I foresaw back then was more interactive electronics with sound. So environmental sound, where you're sitting here in this environment. Everything to me was always spatial, okay? And so, you know, the sound fills the space evenly, right? The walls are actually, you know, sound producers, right? Like, you know, a new system of speaker, like a polyplanar, you know, where you're coating the surface and the surface becomes the speaker. And so it's not pinpointed in any way. And then I could see where people would just interact with the sound. You know, you'd each have your little sequencer pitch that you could tune, and you know, we could all make music together by adjusting, you know, our part of the total thing. This was an idea I had with furniture a long time ago, but I think some of the new interfaces are exciting. The graphic interfaces, where it's gesture oriented. I think that's a wonderful area. I'm aware that I'm playing an ancient design in a way. You know, I have patch chords that I have to set up. It takes an hour, you know, just to put in the patch chords. And I have a lot of issues. I don't know if this is what you're talking about, but I think in the future, we need higher levels of design. You know, like airplanes are designed not to fail. If you had an airplane that crashed every, 3 weeks, it just wouldn't work. Whereas the synth I play crashes all the time. And the machines, there's this magical balance between reliability and magic interaction. But the engineers have to give us the reliability so that in the future, it's just that my particular pet peeve right now is that the machine is not reliable. I don't know if you have that issue. Do you have that issue? No, you don't care.
Actually, I have another question.
Okay.
Sometimes I'm curious about, do you think sound could be really audible forever? Sometimes I feel like sound could be not audible someday. Could be just data, or I don't know. Maybe it's too ideal.
Well, that's like my computer piece that had no volume. I mean, was it? Okay. I mean, I think to have sound, you have to have some volume, or you could just imagine it. I think. Where are you from?
South Korea.
Wow. Okay. And do you play?
Yeah. I play with you same day. Today. But when during your playing, but I'm gonna play.
What's your name?
My name is Min.
Oh, nice.
But I'm gonna play the same time.
Oh, good.
During your playing.
Oh.
But my plan is destroy the place.
It's silent.
No, I'm gonna just. No. My plan is to destroy that art space. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay. I'm so excited. I'm sorry.
I think I'm going to give a silent concert tonight. I like this concept. I know.
Really nice to meet you. And
nice to meet
talk
you
to
too.
You, yes.
Hi.
Hi.
First of all, thanks for being here, and basically thanks for everything you ever did in terms of the development of electronic music. But I was just wondering if you try to keep up with the development of electronic music, the current music scene, and what do you think of the new genres that emerge all the time? The ones that specifically the ones that focus on sound design in like its most extreme forms, like dubstep, for example, or some things like this. Sorry.
Well, that's why I'm here. You know, I want to hear about all this stuff. I do want to learn about all this stuff. So, you know, I'll be here for a few days, and then I'm going to be spending a month at Berklee College of Music this year. And, you know, I'm in my absorption period because honestly, no, I haven't been following. I mean, I've had to, by request, do a lot of mixtapes. I didn't even know what a mixtape was. You know, when I did my first one, it's like, oh, okay. And, you know, so, you know, I have been exploring. And it's a wonderful process because one thing leads to another thing, and it's kind of organic. So I can't say that I'm an expert at all on what's going on right now, but I am in the process of learning. So anything you want to turn me on to, it's fine, you know? If there's something you think I should know, let me know. Okay? Okay, thanks.
Okay, I remember now. So my question was, what do you think of modern electronic instrument? You know, because it's much easier than the Buchla that you've been playing all these years. But I think you've answered the question when you answered Min's question. But you know, if you can elaborate more on that, and whether or not you have one that you like or love, the modern one.
Okay, in my reincarnation in this world, I think what I'm interested in is live performance. And so I look at instruments vis-a-vis, you know, their applicability to interactive live playing. And I think this is a subset, a sub-part of, you know, the big world of electronic music. And I'm interested in not, you know, live mixing or using pre-recorded sounds, which is a viable, you know, approach. It's just not the one that I'm in. I think, you know, I'm interested in the machine that generates the sound. I'm interested in the spatial control of sound. I'm interested in imaginary sonic spaces where we don't, you know, even the early Buchla had a voltage-controlled reverb. So you could have the reverb, you know, come and go. And so you could change the dimension of the space. You can't do that now. So, you know, I'd like to take the things that I love about live performance and somehow manifest those in a new instrument. You know, it has to have feedback, the lights that tell you what's going on. It has to have reliability so that you don't spend your first 3 hours tuning it. And, you know, it's a complex world because it's, you know, what happened even with Buchla going from analog to the digital world, it was a big bump in the road. A lot of his designs were separate from the technology. He didn't say, well, what can this technology do? And that's what I want it to do. He said, what do I want to do and how can I get the technology to do it? He designs from the outside in. And so, you know, a lot of it's tricky because a lot of the digital technology didn't work well in an analog flow. Yeah.
More people.
Hi.
Hi.
You're so cool. I was wondering if
Cried when I first came in here, and I'm sure my eye makeup has just been.
You look great. Beautiful as ever.
yeah, you look really hot. Have you heard of this woman who makes electronic music through plants?
Well, just now.
Yeah, she's really cool. I think you would find her quite interesting because she's doing a similar thing, like pioneering with analog hardware, and she connects all these electro transmitters to these different plants, and she has a room full of plants, and the plants will select the note and then play it through whatever analog synth she chooses. And they actually respond to touch. So she'll go over and start stroking a leaf, and it will change the melody.
Oh my God!
It's so cool.
How
I need to show it
beautiful.
to you. I'll show it to you
I want
afterwards.
to see that. Sounds great.
Her name is escaping me at the moment, but she's like otherworldly. She's super cool.
Wow.
So I'll definitely show that to you later.
It's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good evening.
Good evening. Is it evening?
I guess so. Regarding your collaboration with Miss Aurelia Smith, how easy was it to converse? Like how much was verbal communication beforehand, and how much was just purely musical? Like how did you understand each other?
Well, the odd thing was that we had as a starting point the same sequences that I used on this. So in that paper, I wrote out 4 sequences, and I'm using those tonight as well. So that was our starting point, and that was really all we had agreed on. And other than that, it was like, well, who's going to drive? Whose clock is in charge? And we did this over 3 days, and it was all live. So for a few hours in the afternoon, and we didn't really talk. I had because I lived there with that picture window and the sunrises every morning outside that window, and I had been working on a sunrise piece. And that was our only discussion, which is, maybe this is the time to do the piece about the sun. And she's very intuitive. And it was very easy to work with her. But of course, she'd already worked in my studio for a few months as an assistant. So I think we had some, common awareness.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Hi, just one more. Have you ever been approached, or have you tried approaching someone to possibly rebuild the Buchla that was broken?
Yes.
Did it work, or did it?
Well, I was just talking with Hannah about how hard it is to communicate with engineers. Because, to me, it's not their fault. It's not like I'm saying they're not receptive or whatever. It's that maybe I don't communicate. So, to me, in my mind, everything seems so obvious. It's like, well, you got to have this, you got to have that. And it just isn't sticking. So what I've decided to do is make a big drawing, and just put all the parts, that I want on this big drawing, and then point to it, because I think unless it gets concrete, the conversation just dissipates in the air and nothing happens, because they're always looking for some specific thing. If you give them 5 problems, they'll hook onto one. And it's not, I don't know. I don't, yes, I've talked to a lot of engineers, and I'm still looking, yeah.
Can I say that facilitating the communication between artists and engineers is one of the many reasons we're doing this?
Really? Oh my God.
That all of us learn from each other. Thank you, Suzanne Ciani.
Thank you.